Nothing prepares you for the moment when your world is turned upside down in an instant. My name is Ahmed, and for as long as I can remember, my life was rooted in the teachings of Islam. I was born into a devout family where faith wasn't just a part of life, it was life itself. 5 times a day, I would bow in prayer, reciting the verses of the Quran with reverence. The mosque was my sanctuary, a place where I found peace and purpose. I took pride in my devotion, believing with certainty that my dedication to Allah and the principles of Islam would lead me to eternal salvation. From a young age, I immersed myself in Islamic teachings. I studied the hadiths, memorized key surahs, and sought wisdom from scholars. My life had a rhythm, a structure, a deep sense of purpose. I was walking the straight path, just as the Quran described. But even the strongest foundations can shake. Late at night, in the silence of my own thoughts, questions would creep in. They were fleeting, unwelcome intrusions in my otherwise steadfast faith. What if my deeds weren't enough? The Quran spoke of judgment, of sins and good deeds weighed on a scale. But what if, despite my best efforts, I fell short? I buried those doubts in prayer, in study, in debate. I took pride in defending Islam, dismantling Christian arguments whenever the opportunity arose. To me, Christianity was flawed, its doctrine of the Trinity incomprehensible, its belief in salvation through grace alone absurd. Jesus was a prophet, revered and respected, but a man nonetheless. The idea of him being the Son of God felt like a shortcut, an easy way out that ignored the weight of accountability. Yet even as I dismissed Christianity, those quiet doubts remained, a whisper in the back of my mind, waiting for the moment when I could no longer ignore them. It happened on what should have been an ordinary day. I had traveled to visit family in another city, starting my morning as I always did, with Fajr prayer, supplications, and a deep discussion on theology with my younger brother. Then I felt it, a slight discomfort in my chest. Nothing serious, I told myself, just indigestion. But as the day wore on, that discomfort turned into a stabbing pain that stole my breath. "Ahmed, we're going to the hospital," my brother said, grabbing his keys. I protested. It was nothing. I was fine. But by the time we reached the emergency room, I could barely stand. The doctors moved quickly, their expressions growing more serious with each passing moment. Within an hour, I was hooked up to machines, their beeping the only sound filling the room as a doctor spoke words I never expected to hear. "You're having a heart attack." I couldn't believe it. A heart attack? At my age? I had always taken care of myself, eating right, exercising, praying regularly. How could this be happening? As the doctors worked to stabilize me, a wave of fear crashed over me. A fear unlike anything I had ever known. I thought of my family, my life, the prayers I had yet to offer. Was this it? Was I about to meet my Creator, unprepared, uncertain? The room blurred, the voices around me fading. My chest felt like it was being crushed, every breath more labored than the last. I closed my eyes, whispering the Shahada over and over, desperately clinging to the one thing I had always believed would save me. But in that moment, as the darkness closed in, one question burned brighter than the rest, one I could no longer ignore. Was I truly ready to meet God? Everything went black, no sound, no light, no sense of time or place, just an endless void. I should have felt afraid, but instead, a strange awareness settled over me. This wasn't the end. Something, or someone, was waiting for me. Then, the darkness shifted. It wasn't like waking up. It was more like being pulled through the fabric of reality itself. A quiet anticipation filled the void, as if I were standing on the threshold of something vast and unknown. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew, without a doubt, my life was about to change forever. And then, Suddenly, I could see again, or at least, I thought I could. I wasn't in my body anymore. I was weightless, floating, yet completely aware. Below me, the hospital room came into focus. I saw myself, my own body, lying still on the hospital bed, surrounded by doctors moving frantically. The rhythmic beeping of machines filled the air, erratic and urgent. My brother was there, gripping the edge of a chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. His face was pale, stricken with worry. I should have felt fear, panic, desperation. But instead, I felt nothing but an eerie calm, as if I were watching a scene from a movie, one that had nothing to do with me. I tried to speak, to call out, to tell my brother I was still here, but no sound came. In fact, I wasn't even sure I had a mouth anymore. I wasn't in pain, but I also wasn't truly there. I was tethered to something else, a different reality, observing everything but unable to interact. What is happening? The question echoed in my mind. Am I dead? The thought sent a chill through whatever I was now. My faith had always taught me that death was the beginning of something greater. But was this it? Was this the moment I had feared and prepared for my entire life? Then something shifted again. A presence, a light. But this wasn't light from the hospital. No, this was something else. Something beyond the room, beyond the world I had known. It wasn't just a glow in the distance. It was pulling me, reaching deep into whatever I had become. It was close, yet impossibly far, and the moment I became aware of it, I felt its magnetism. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to hold on to what I knew, to resist. But the light wasn't just something to see, it was something to feel. And what I felt was warmth, not like sunlight warming your skin. No, this was different. This warmth touched the soul, seeping into the very core of my being. It was soothing, but it carried something else, something powerful, something beyond comprehension. I wanted to question it. I wanted to ask, where am I? Where am I going? But in the presence of this light, my questions felt insignificant. And then, I moved closer. The warmth grew stronger. The light enveloped me. And for the first time, I felt something I never expected. Something that would shatter everything I thought I knew. It was peace unlike anything I had ever known. Not just a fleeting moment of tranquility, not the kind that comes with deep prayer or meditation. This was absolute. Every worry, every doubt, every fear, gone, stripped away as though they had never existed. And yet, beneath that overwhelming peace, a quiet certainty stirred within me. Something was about to happen, something that would change everything. The light wrapped around me completely now, not just warm, but alive. It pulsed with power, vibrant and incomprehensible. I wasn't just standing in light. I was standing in the presence of something greater, something beyond anything I had ever imagined. Then, I saw him. At first, he was distant, a figure barely visible through the radiance. But as he stepped forward, everything else faded away. His presence commanded my attention, not through force, but through something even stronger, love. His eyes met mine, and in that instant, I knew. He saw everything, every thought I had ever had, every secret, every failure, every longing. And yet, there was no condemnation in his gaze, only deep, unwavering understanding. Then he spoke, "I am Jesus." The words hit me like a thunderbolt. Jesus? My mind reeled. As a Muslim, I had always believed in him as a prophet, a great one even, but nothing more. The idea that he could be standing before me now, in this place, in this form, it was impossible, wasn't it? The world around us began to shift. Scenes unfolded within the light, vivid, alive, as though I had been transported through time itself. The first images were familiar. Stories from the Quran about Jesus, ones I had studied since childhood. But now I wasn't just reading about them. I was there. I watched him heal the sick, give sight to the blind, raise the dead with a mere touch. I had always accepted these miracles as truth, but now I felt them. The compassion in his touch, the authority in his words. And then I saw something that shook me to my core: the crucifixion. I had never truly understood it before. I had been taught that Jesus was never actually crucified, that it was an illusion, a mistaken identity. But here he was, suffering beyond comprehension, each breath a struggle, his body broken and bruised. Yet even in that agony, there was something else: love. I felt it, radiating from him even in his pain. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you do this?" Jesus turned to me, his eyes filled with a love so pure it was unbearable. "For you," he said. "For all of you." The weight of his words crashed over me. My entire life, I had believed salvation came through deeds, through prayer, through effort, through striving to tip the scales of judgment in my favor. The idea that someone else would take on the burden of humanity's sins, willingly, out of love. It was almost too much to comprehend. Tears streamed down my face as I stood in the presence of the truth I had spent my whole life resisting. Everything I had believed, everything I had clung to, was being turned upside down. And yet, in the midst of it all, there was clarity. Like a puzzle I had been struggling to solve for years, and now, finally, the pieces were falling into place. Jesus took a step closer. "There is more to see," he said gently. "Will you come with me?" I nodded, my heart pounding. I had no idea what lay ahead, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. What I saw next left me breathless. A place unlike anything on earth. People of every kind, their faces radiant, glowing with an inner joy beyond description. There was no sorrow here, no pain, no suffering, only love. A love so deep, it seemed to saturate the very air. "This is heaven," Jesus said, his voice warm. "This is what it means to be united with God." I barely found the words to respond. It was perfect. But then a thought crept in, a question I had spent my entire life asking. How do you get here? I had always believed that heaven was something to be earned, that if I prayed hard enough, lived well enough, did enough good, maybe, just maybe, I would be worthy. Jesus turned to me, and in his eyes, I saw the answer before he even spoke. No one can earn perfection, Ahmed. No one can live without sin, no matter how much they try. God's love is not something to be earned, it is something to be accepted. That is why I gave my life for you, for everyone, so that through me, you could be free. His words shook me to my core. Everything I had ever believed, everything I had built my life upon, striving, doing, being good enough, was crumbling beneath me. I had spent my entire existence trying to earn God's favor, believing that salvation was something to be achieved. But now, in this place of perfect peace, I was being told it had already been given. Then the light around me dimmed, and for the first time, I saw them. Figures moving in the shadows, their faces twisted in pain and regret. They reached out, their hands desperate, searching, pleading for something, for someone. But there was no answer. A wave of despair crashed over me, sinking deep into my soul. "Why?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Why do they suffer like this?" Jesus' expression was heavy with sorrow. They chose separation. I turned to look at him, confusion tightening my chest. "God's love is offered to everyone," he continued, his voice steady, yet filled with grief. "But not everyone accepts it. Hell is not a place of God's wrath. It is the absence of His presence. The words hit me like a hammer. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't vengeance. It was separation. Tears streamed down my face as the weight of His words sank in. My entire life, I had been striving, praying, fasting, doing everything I could to be good enough. But standing here, in the presence of Jesus, I realized all He ever wanted was my heart. Ahmed. His voice was soft, yet firm. Will you accept my gift? The air seemed to still. Will you trust me to lead you to the Father? I hesitated, not out of doubt, but because of the sheer magnitude of this moment. Everything I had ever believed, everything I had ever lived for, it was all being rewritten in a single breath. And then, yes. The moment the word left my lips, I felt something I had never known before: freedom. A weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying lifted from my soul. Then, suddenly, a shift. The light around us changed. I felt something pulling me, drawing me back to the world I had left behind. Wait, I gasped, startled. I don't want to leave. I want to stay here with you. Jesus smiled, a smile that was both comforting and challenging. Your time here is not yet finished. His gaze held mine, unwavering. There are people who need to hear your story, Ahmed. They need to know the truth. I opened my mouth to protest, but I knew he was right. The light around me shifted once more, and then darkness. I gasped, my chest heaving, my body jolting with life. Blurry figures moved around me. Machines beeped erratically. My lungs burned as if they had been starved of air. Then a voice, trembling, filled with shock and joy. Ahmed, can you hear me? I blinked, struggling to focus. My brother's face came into view, his eyes wide with emotion. I nodded weakly. But I couldn't find the words. How could I possibly explain what had just happened? I had been in the presence of Jesus. I had seen heaven and hell, and now I was back. For the first few hours, I barely spoke. My family stayed by my side, their relief evident in every glance, every touch. But inside me, a storm raged. How could I reconcile this experience with everything I had believed? How could I even begin to tell them? My family had always been devout, proud of their heritage, their faith. How could I tell them that everything we had believed might not be the full truth? I closed my eyes, hoping for sleep. Instead, I saw his face again. Kind, loving, patient. His words echoed in my mind. Go, Ahmed, share the truth. I will be with you always. The thought both comforted me and terrified me. Over the next few days, as my body slowly healed, my mind remained restless. I couldn't ignore what I had seen, but I also couldn't ignore what it would cost me. And then, one night, in the stillness of my hospital room, I did something I never thought I would do. I reached for a Bible. It felt strange in my hands, almost forbidden. But as I opened it and began to read, I couldn't stop. The words leapt off the page, resonating with everything I had just experienced. It was as if the book itself was alive, speaking directly to my soul. Passages from the Quran that had always puzzled me now made sense. Prophecies I had overlooked or misunderstood were suddenly clear. With every verse, every revelation, my heart pounded with understanding. And then, a thought struck me. I needed to tell someone who might understand. My brother. He had always been my closest confidant. If there was anyone who might listen, who might believe me, it was him. Taking a deep breath, my hands trembling, I picked up my phone and dialed his number. The line rang, and I prayed he would answer. When he finally answered the phone, I could hear the concern in my brother's voice. Ahmed, is everything okay? I took a shaky breath. No, I admitted. "I need to tell you something. Something that happened while I was gone." There was a pause on the other end. "Okay," he replied cautiously, sensing the weight of my words. "I'm listening." I wasn't sure who else would understand, or at least listen, but I knew one person who might. Hassan. We sat together over tea, the familiar warmth of the cup in my hands grounding me as I began. "I need to tell you something. It's different, though." I hesitated, gathering my thoughts. "It's about what happened when I was in the hospital." Hassan raised an eyebrow, concern crossing his face. "You mean when we thought we'd lost you?" he asked, his voice tight with memory. I nodded. "Yes. But I didn't just lose consciousness. I went somewhere. I saw something. Someone." His expression grew serious, and he leaned forward. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. I'm sure it wasn't just a dream. The mind can do strange things when the body is under stress, but I've thought about that. And Hassan, this wasn't a dream. It was more real than anything I've ever experienced. His eyes searched mine, weighing my words. "I felt his presence," I continued. "I saw heaven. I saw hell. And I know what he told me is true." Hassan looked away for a moment, struggling to process what I had said. "So you're saying that everything we've believed, everything we've lived by, isn't the whole truth?" I nodded gently, my voice calm but firm. "No, Hassan. I'm saying that the truth is bigger than we thought." Over the next few days, I shared my experience with a few others, people I trusted, people who knew my heart. Some reacted just as Hassan had, a mixture of skepticism and concern. Others dismissed it outright, unable to entertain the idea that I could have encountered Jesus. But a few listened with open minds, asking questions and showing curiosity about what I had experienced. One of them was an older man from our community, someone I had always admired for his wisdom and understanding of the world. He was a man I knew would give me a fair hearing. One evening, I stood before a small gathering of family, friends, and a few curious strangers. My heart pounded in my chest as I prepared to speak, but there was a steadying presence beside me. It was as though Jesus himself were standing there giving me strength. "I know many of you will find this hard to believe," I said, my voice trembling but determined. "But I must tell you what happened to me when I was at the brink of death. I encountered Jesus. He showed me the truth about God and the path to salvation." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and several people leaned forward, their eyes filled with questions. One man spoke up, his voice skeptical but not dismissive. "Do you really believe this?" I met his gaze, unwavering. "I don't just believe it," I said, my voice steady. "I know it, and I hope you'll seek the truth for yourself." Over time, I found ways to bridge the gap between my Islamic upbringing and my newfound faith in Jesus. I spoke about the shared values of love, compassion, and devotion to God. I showed how the prophecies in the Quran pointed to Jesus, and how his message fulfilled the promises of our faith. But I knew there were still more challenges ahead. As I prepared to take the next step in my journey, I prayed for courage, knowing that my testimony could inspire some, but it could also lead to rejection and loss. Yet, deep in my heart, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't alone. Jesus was with me, just as he had promised. And that truth, that presence, was enough to carry me forward. Jesus is with me. It was a phrase I whispered to myself every day, a reassurance that gave me peace as I stepped fully into my new life with him. I had felt so lost before, but now I felt a peace like never before. For so long, my faith had been about striving, about proving myself worthy. But now I knew it was about grace. I began speaking publicly, sharing my story with anyone willing to listen. I told them about the moment I met Jesus, about the visions of heaven and hell, and about the message of grace that had completely transformed my life. The responses were mixed. Some were curious, asking thoughtful questions about my encounter and how it aligned with both the Quran and the teachings of Jesus. Others were skeptical, unable to reconcile my story with the faith they had always known. But there were moments when I could see the stirring in people's hearts, the flicker of recognition. People who had once been indifferent to faith began to ask questions. Some, who had been rigid in their beliefs, found themselves reconsidering. One evening, my mother's eyes filled with tears as I spoke, the struggle in her heart evident. She wanted to understand, but the tension between what I was saying and the faith she had held all her life was too great. My siblings were divided too. Some dismissed my story outright, while others quietly wondered, but were afraid to voice their thoughts. In those early days, I found strength in the stories of others, former Muslims, Christians with Muslim backgrounds, and people from all walks of life who had encountered Jesus in profound ways. Their stories showed me that I wasn't alone in this transformation. As I continued to share my testimony, I saw lives changing. People began to question the certainty they had always held, and I found myself helping them along the same journey I had walked, seeking the truth. I spoke about the shared values between Islam and Christianity, how both faiths honored love, devotion, and the pursuit of truth. I highlighted the prophecies and teachings in the Quran that pointed to Jesus as the Messiah, showing that these two faiths weren't as separate as they seemed. But I made it clear that the message of Jesus went beyond religion. It was about relationship. As I reflect on this chapter of my life, I want to leave you with one thing. Seeking the truth takes courage. It means being willing to question everything you've known, to step into the unknown, and to trust that God will guide you. But I promise you this, it's worth it. If you've been touched by my story, if you feel that stirring in your heart, I encourage you, seek Jesus. Open your heart to Him, and He will meet you where you are. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you'd like to share your own story, I'm here.